Dmitry Volkov had never believed in fate. To him, everything that happened could be explained by reason, logic, and circumstances, random chance, personal choices, and the natural course of events. At 26, he was a typical representative of the millennial generation, practical, reserved, and unambitious in the traditional sense. He worked as a programmer at a small IT company in one of Moscow's many office buildings. The job was stable and somewhat monotonous, but it paid enough to afford a one-bedroom apartment in a quiet residential district and even save a bit for the future. Dmitry didn't dream of quick success or lofty achievements. He preferred a calm life without surprises or disruptions. His days followed a predictable rhythm, like a well-structured algorithm. In the morning, there was coffee and a quick scroll through the news on his phone, sometimes a few pages of a book or a few minutes of meditation to set the tone for the day. Then the usual commute in the crowded metro, headphones in place, playing technology podcasts, interviews with famous developers, or just his favorite music. At the office, tasks awaited him: writing code, fixing bugs, testing new features. Lunchtime meant a short break at a nearby cafe where he ordered soup and a fresh salad, leaning toward healthy eating. In the evening, he'd either hit the gym or meet with friends to play board games and discuss the latest news in tech. Weekends were for resting at home, occasionally visiting his parents, who lived in a cozy house in Korolev, a small town near Moscow. His parents, both teachers, were kind, intelligent people who always supported Dmitry's independence and aspirations, even if they didn't always understand his line of work. Life for Dmitry flowed like a calm river, slow but steady. He didn't rush to make grand plans, didn't long for a move to Silicon Valley or the launch of a startup with billion-dollar ambitions. He found peace in consistency, a steady paycheck, modest monthly savings, and the ability to plan the next few years without stress. Now and then, he imagined owning his own apartment with a small study, bookshelves, and a reliable computer setup. Maybe in 5 or 7 years, he'd take out a mortgage, meet someone special, settle down, and begin the so-called adult phase of life. But those thoughts always lingered in the background, buried beneath the layers of everyday concerns and tasks. One cold, rainy morning in October, when Moscow was draped in its usual autumn grayness, Dmitry was descending the stairs of his apartment building. He rarely paid attention to the row of mailboxes in the entryway. All important bills and notices came electronically, and paper flyers he usually ignored. But that morning, something made him stop in front of box number 127. He pulled out his keys and opened the mailbox. Among the usual papers lay a small white envelope, unmarked and with no return address. His name was written neatly across the front, to Dmitry Volkov. The handwriting struck him, familiar, yet hard to place. The envelope itself looked unusual, thick, slightly yellowed paper, as if it came from another era. It even smelled different, a faint scent of old books and wood dust. He turned it over in his hands. There was no stamp or postmark, just a smudged date that was barely legible. Probably some weird promotion, he muttered to himself, trying to brush it off. He slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket and headed for work, not giving it much more thought. Throughout the day, he kept touching the envelope, as if it had a weight beyond its paper and ink. It didn't feel like an ad. It felt like an invitation to something he couldn't yet define. Only that evening, after returning home from a long workday, did Dmitry finally decide to open the mysterious letter. He carefully sliced the edge with a utility knife and unfolded the sheet of paper inside. The text, written in that same semi-familiar handwriting, struck a deep chord within him. It felt as if he were reading words penned by his own hand. Not now, but years from now. Dear Dima, I know how strange this must feel, but I have no other choice. I have to warn you. Tomorrow, October 15th, around 2 p.m., you'll receive a call from Anna Mikhailovna from Human Resources. She'll invite you to join a new internal project. You wanted to decline, don't. Trust me or trust yourself. Your future self, Dmitry, November 14th, 2024. Dmitry read the letter several times, each time more slowly. His heart raced. A letter from the future? In his own handwriting? It was absurd, impossible. And yet, Something about it felt undeniably real. He stood by the window for a long while, watching raindrops slide down the glass, his thoughts spinning. Was it a prank? A clever fake? A bizarre coincidence? Or something else entirely? A call from his friend Sergei helped distract him. Dmitri told him about the letter, expecting ridicule. But Sergei, though amused, didn't completely dismiss it. "Well," he said, "let's just wait and see. If she calls, we'll know." The next day, Dmitri's life would begin to change in ways he couldn't imagine. But for now, he was just a man standing in a quiet apartment, waiting for tomorrow and whatever it might bring. The morning sun barely filtered through the thin curtains when Dmitri woke up, the strange letter from the previous night still fresh in his mind. He turned it over in his hands one more time, eyes tracing the familiar handwriting that was unmistakably his own, yet dated weeks into the future. The oddity of it kept pulling at his thoughts, blending skepticism with a faint thread of hope, or perhaps fear. At breakfast, the letter sat on the table, folded precisely as he had placed it. His usual routine felt oddly different, less mechanical, as if some invisible current was nudging him to be more alert, more aware. The mundane details of his daily commute and work felt suddenly weighty, charged with the anticipation of something unknown. Arriving at the office, Dmitri tried to push aside the unease. He logged in, glanced over emails, and began sifting through code reviews, all while his mind lingered on the letter's message. The call from Anna Mikhailovna was as precise as foretold. Around 2 o'clock, the phone rang with the expected introduction from HR. When she invited him to join a new project, a flicker of disbelief shot through him. The strange letter had accurately predicted this. His initial urge to decline wrestled with the letter's warning. Was it truly fate or some elaborate prank? He decided to trust the letter, if only tentatively, and agreed to the meeting. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze, the code on his screen blurring into a background noise beneath a thrum of questions spinning in his head. The meeting with Anna Mikhailovna revealed a project unlike any Dmitri had anticipated. It wasn't just about programming. It was a dive into history, archives, and obscure manuscripts, something far outside his usual realm. The client, a collector named Grigory Ivanovich, had an extensive trove of old letters and documents that needed cataloging and digitization. Despite his practical nature, Dmitri found himself intrigued. The invitation to engage with history through technology was unexpected but captivating. As the conversation unfolded, the letter's words echoed in his mind. "You wanted to refuse. Don't do it." Leaving the meeting, Dmitri felt a curious mixture of excitement and apprehension. What was it about this project that felt so vital, so intertwined with the mysterious letter? Was it possible that somehow his future self was steering him towards something beyond mere code and software? The days that followed were a blend of routine and revelation. At the collector's residence, an old mansion tucked into a quiet Moscow neighborhood, Dmitri was introduced to the world of dusty papers, yellowed envelopes, and stories trapped in ink. Grigory Ivanovich, a man with sharp eyes and a patient demeanor, spoke with passion about the importance of preserving the past. Dmitri began building the database for the collection, mapping each letter and document with careful attention. The work demanded precision but also patience and curiosity, qualities Dmitri hadn't fully realized he possessed. The house itself seemed to hum with the weight of time, the walls lined with shelves overflowing with archives waiting to be understood. Every evening, Dmitri returned to his small apartment, where the letter waited silently on the table. He reread the message from his future self, the handwriting comforting and yet unnerving. He tried to grasp the logic behind it all. Could he truly influence events by following the letter's guidance? And if so, what else might be coming? Then unexpectedly, a second letter appeared in his mailbox. It was identical in form, but carried a new message. This one cautioned him to keep the letter secret from Grigory Ivanovich and hinted at deeper mysteries connected to time itself. The mention of a particular document in the collector's archive that would seem familiar unsettled Dmitri, fueling both his curiosity and unease. As he delved deeper into the project, Strange coincidences began to pile up. The document mentioned in the letter was not only familiar, it seemed tied to his own family history. Whispers of a physicist relative who had vanished under mysterious circumstances decades ago stirred up old family stories Dmitri had barely known. The house's antique clock, an ornate timepiece on the wall, caught his attention daily. It seemed out of sync with the world outside, as if marking more than just the passing hours. Dmitri's mind wrestled with the idea that time might be less linear than he had always believed, more like a spiral where past and future could intertwine in unexpected ways. His nights grew restless, filled with questions and fragmented dreams, where past and future blurred. Dmitri found himself caught between disbelief and the undeniable pull of the letters. He wasn't sure what awaited him, but the path ahead was no longer just a straight line. In the quiet moments between work and sleep, he began to wonder, who was sending these letters and why? Was it really his future self trying to change fate, or something else entirely? And if he dared to follow their guidance, what price would he pay? As the week drew to a close, Dmitri resolved to uncover the truth about the letters, the collector, and the secrets woven into the fabric of time itself. But every answer seemed to only deepen the mystery, and the question of whether he was mastering his destiny or being pulled by it remained unanswered. The following weeks became a whirl of unexpected events and unsettling discoveries for Dmitri. The letters continued arriving, each more enigmatic and urgent than the last. They came in the same distinctive handwriting, folded with the same precision, and sealed with an almost ritualistic care. Each letter revealed fragments of future moments, warnings about seemingly small decisions that held weight far beyond the immediate present. Dmitri found himself walking a thin line between skepticism and belief. He would read each letter multiple times, trying to decipher not only the words but the intent behind them. Some urged caution, others encouraged boldness. The strange thing was that whenever he followed the advice, the predicted outcome came true. When he ignored a warning, the consequences could be dire. One morning, the letter warned about a minor accident on the metro line Dmitri used every day. It suggested he take a later train to avoid the incident. That day, hesitating just long enough, he narrowly missed a chaotic scene where a sudden power outage caused panic and delay. The experience was both frightening and compelling proof that the letters contained truth. But not all messages were simple or clear. One letter spoke of a choice at the crossroads, without specifying when or where. Another cautioned him about trusting a colleague in the IT department whom Dmitri had never really paid attention to before. Slowly, a sense of paranoia crept in. He began observing people, conversations, and events with heightened awareness, searching for clues hidden in the everyday. The project with Grigory Ivanovich continued, but Dmitri's focus was divided. The collector's mansion, once a place of calm fascination, now felt like a labyrinth of secrets. Some documents referenced strange phenomena, theories about time travel, and cryptic symbols that Dmitri couldn't place. One particularly old letter bore the signature of a man named Alexander Volkov, his own grandfather, whose story Dmitri had heard only in fragments. Curiosity led Dmitri to investigate his family history more deeply. He visited his parents, dug through old albums, and scanned faded letters and diaries. The more he learned, the more questions arose. Alexander Volkov was a physicist involved in research on quantum mechanics in the 1970s, but official records abruptly ended around the time he disappeared. Family whispers hinted at a mysterious experiment gone wrong, but no clear details were ever shared. The letters began to hint at this past, mentioning a bridge across time and a key hidden in bloodlines. Dmitri struggled to connect the dots. Was he somehow linked to this experiment? Were the letters a message from his grandfather, or from his future self trying to warn him about repeating the same fate? Meanwhile, his personal life grew complicated. His relationship with a close friend, Elena, became strained as Dmitri withdrew into his obsession with the letters. She tried to support him, but found it difficult to understand the strange warnings and cryptic messages that dominated his thoughts. At times, Dmitri wondered if he was losing grip on reality. One letter, more urgent than ever, warned Dmitri that someone was watching him, someone who wanted the letters and what they represented for their own purposes. A sense of danger settled over him, and he became cautious about who he trusted. He changed his routines, monitored his surroundings, and even considered abandoning the project and the letters altogether. But the pull was too strong. The mystery of the letters, the connection to his family's past, and the tantalizing possibility of controlling time itself kept him tethered to this strange new reality. Late one evening, while working alone in the archives, Dmitri found a hidden compartment in an old desk. Inside lay a small, leather-bound journal filled with notes in his grandfather's handwriting. The entries described theories of time loops, alternate realities, and the peril of changing events in the past. A final note was abruptly cut off, as if interrupted. Reading the journal, Dmitri felt the weight of his grandfather's obsession and the shadows it cast over his own life. He realized that the letters were more than just messages. They were a legacy, a call to confront the unknown and decide what to do with the power they hinted at. As the nights grew colder and the letters more frequent, Dmitri stood at a precipice, caught between the safety of the known and the dangerous promise of the future. Every decision now seemed to ripple across time, and every choice could alter the fragile balance he was only beginning to understand. The story was no longer just about letters from the future. It was about a family's hidden past, the mysteries of time, and a young man's struggle to grasp a destiny larger than himself. Dmitri's life had become a puzzle where each piece was a question, each letter a clue, and the answers were still out of reach. Dmitri's search for answers deepened, pulling him further into realms he had never imagined. With each passing day, the letter's cryptic messages pushed him to explore beyond the boundaries of logic and reason. He sought out experts, delved into scientific theories, and even entertained the possibility of the supernatural. His first stop was a university professor renowned for work on time perception in theoretical physics. Dr. Makarov was skeptical when Dmitri presented the letters, but agreed to look at the handwriting and the contents. After days of analysis, the professor concluded that while the letters couldn't be authenticated scientifically, their predictions were eerily accurate. "You might be dealing with a psychological phenomenon or an elaborate hoax," he said, "but the consistency is puzzling." Dmitri wasn't satisfied with this explanation. He wanted to know if there was a real mechanism behind the letters. He turned to mysticism and folklore, reading about legends of messages crossing time and space, tales of seers and mediums who bridged worlds unseen. He even attended a seance, driven by a desperate hope to communicate with whatever force was behind the letters. The experience was unsettling, but yielded no answers. Desperate to find a personal connection, Dmitri revisited his family history. He spent long hours in the dusty archives of the local historical museum, poring over old newspapers, photographs, and official records. Slowly, a picture emerged. His grandfather Alexander was not only a physicist, but also rumored to have been involved with secret government projects during the Cold War. Projects that aimed to manipulate time itself. In one faded article, Dmitri read about a mysterious accident in the laboratory where Alexander worked. The incident was officially described as a chemical explosion, but whispers suggested a failed experiment with temporal consequences. Relatives who had known Alexander avoided the topic, their eyes clouded with fear or shame. The family kept silent, burying the past deep. One day, Dmitri discovered an old box hidden beneath the floorboards in his parents' house. Inside were letters and journals from Alexander addressed to his wife, but the language was strange, filled with symbols and coded references. Among the pages was a map of the old research facility, with marks that suggested a hidden chamber or vault. This discovery reignited Dmitri's resolve. He contacted Elena again, confessing everything. Though hesitant, she agreed to help him investigate further. Together, they planned a visit to the abandoned research site, now a forgotten relic on the outskirts of the city. Before going, Dmitri received another letter. This one different. No handwriting, no seal. It was typed, cold, and clinical, warning him to stop digging or face consequences. The message was unmistakable. Someone knew what he was up to and wanted him to quit. The tension grew. Dmitri felt the walls closing in. At work, his computer was occasionally accessed remotely without explanation. Strange calls came in at night, heavy breathing on the other end before the line went dead. Friends began to ask questions, concerned about his obsession. Despite the danger, Dmitri couldn't turn back. The letters held a key to understanding not only his own fate, but perhaps the fabric of time itself. The past and future intertwined in a complex dance, and Dmitri was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. At the abandoned facility, he and Elena found rusted machinery, cracked walls, and faded signs warning of hazardous materials. Yet beneath the decay, something stirred. A hidden door, an underground corridor, and a chamber that seemed untouched by time. Within it lay a console, a bank of old equipment, and a cryptic message inscribed on the wall. Time is a river, not a line. Dmitri realized that the experiment his grandfather had worked on was more than theoretical. It was a gateway, a breach in time's flow. The letters were evidence that this breach still existed and that he was now entangled in its web. The mystery deepened, but so did Dmitri's determination. The past was no longer just history. It was a puzzle piece in the present and the key to the future. The letters were guiding him to a revelation that could change everything. And as the night grew darker outside the chamber, Dmitri understood that his journey had only just begun. The weight of the choices ahead pressed heavily on Dmitri's mind. The warnings were no longer just vague threats. They were tangible shadows creeping into his daily life. Every step forward brought resistance, both from the outside world and from within himself. The line between curiosity and fear blurred, and the once simple questions about the letters grew into profound moral dilemmas. Dmitri had uncovered secrets that reached beyond his understanding. Secrets that could alter the course of events, not just for him, but for many others. The realization that he might be meddling with time itself unsettled him deeply. What right did he have to change things? Was he playing God or simply trying to save himself? One evening, after hours spent analyzing the patterns in the letters, Dmitri received a chilling call. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. Stop now, or there will be consequences you cannot imagine. The line went dead before Dmitri could respond. This threat was unlike the previous anonymous letters. It felt personal and urgent. His computer was hacked again, this time leaving a message on his screen. You are being watched. It was no longer just about discovering the truth. Someone was actively trying to stop him. Dmitri confided in Elena, who had grown increasingly worried about his obsession. You have to be careful, she urged. We don't know who we're dealing with, but they clearly have power and influence. The moral conflict gnawed at Dmitri's conscience. Every letter held advice or warnings that, if followed, could change his life for the better, or worse. When he first received the letter about Anna Mikhailovna's call, obeying it had led to a successful project and a small promotion. But another letter warned him against a seemingly trivial decision about a friend, which, if ignored, resulted in strained relationships. Was this power a blessing or a curse? And who could be trusted with such knowledge? Meanwhile, the shadowy threat escalated. Dmitri noticed strangers near his apartment, subtle surveillance that grew more obvious by the day. Friends who once joked now offered concerned looks, hinting they suspected something was wrong, but didn't know what. One afternoon, while walking home, Dmitri was approached by a man in a dark coat, his eyes cold and unreadable. The man handed Dmitri a plain envelope and said simply, "This is your last warning." Before Dmitri could respond, the man vanished into the crowd. Inside the envelope was a letter unlike the others, typed, impersonal, and chilling in its precision. It detailed personal information about Dmitri's family, his routines, even Elena's involvement. The message was clear. His life and those he cared about were now in danger. The pressure mounted. Dmitri struggled to keep his normal life intact while unraveling the mystery. He feared what the next letter might reveal and whether he could control the consequences of his actions. At the same time, his investigation into his grandfather's past revealed deeper connections. Alexander's research wasn't just about time. It was tied to powerful organizations with murky agendas. Some wanted to harness the knowledge for their own ends, others to bury it forever. Dmitri found himself at a crossroads. Continue seeking the truth, risking everything he held dear, or abandon the pursuit and protect those around him. But the letters continued to arrive, each pulling him deeper into a web of secrets, lies, and possible futures. The battle between fate and free will played out in his mind. Could he change the course of events without destroying the fragile balance of reality? Or was the future already written, and his actions merely echoes of what must be? Elena stood by his side, a steady anchor in the storm. Together, they prepared to face whatever threats came next, knowing that the path forward was fraught with danger, but also hope. In the silence of his apartment, Dmitri stared at the latest letter, the words burning into his thoughts. Your choice will shape everything. Choose wisely. The ultimate decision was looming, and the stakes had never been higher. The final letter arrived on a quiet morning, its arrival almost unremarkable, just a plain white envelope slipped through the door, no stamps, no return address. Dmitri picked it up with a mixture of hesitation and resolve. He had come so far, unraveling mysteries that had once seemed impossible. Yet the core question remained unanswered. What was the true purpose of these letters, and what fate awaited him? He unfolded the sheet carefully. The handwriting was his own, familiar yet distant, as if written by someone who had lived 1,000 lives. The words conveyed something both comforting and unsettling. Dmitri, by the time you read this, you have faced the impossible. The choices were never easy, and the road was fraught with uncertainty. You may have altered some events, saved some moments, but others were bound to remain unchanged. The letters you received were not just messages, they were a bridge between who you are and who you might become. They came from a future where hope and fear collide, where the consequences of knowledge weigh heavily. Now you stand at the crossroads of destiny and acceptance. The future is not fixed, but neither is it infinitely malleable. Every action echoes, every choice ripples through time. Remember this, the power to change is also the power to accept. Your journey is not an end, but a beginning. Trust yourself. Trust the path you choose. With respect, your future self. As Dmitri reread the letter, a calmness washed over him. The storm of uncertainty had not vanished, but it had settled into a quiet determination. The tangled web of past and future, of threat and hope, had led him here, to a place where he no longer feared the unknown, but embraced it. He looked around his modest apartment, the books, the computer, the photos of his family and Elena. Everything he had fought to protect, everything he had risked was still here. The fragile balance of his life was intact, and it was his to shape. Elena entered quietly, sensing the change. What does it say? She asked softly. Dmitri smiled, folding the letter and placing it gently on the table. It's time to stop running from the future and start living with it. In the days that followed, the letters ceased. The silence was a new companion, one filled with possibility rather than fear. Dmitri felt the weight of choice lift, replaced by the freedom to move forward without the shadow of unseen forces. He reached out to friends, rebuilt connections strained by secrecy and doubt. He pursued his work with renewed passion, not because of predictions or warnings, but because he believed in his own path. The mystery of the letters remained partly unsolved, a lingering enigma that whispered of worlds beyond comprehension. But Dmitri had learned that some truths were not about control, but about trust, in oneself, in time, and in the unpredictable dance of life. As autumn turned to winter, Dmitri stood by the window, watching the first snowflakes fall softly on the city. The future stretched out before him, unknown and unwritten. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, ready to write his own story.